Hello friends, my name's Christopher. I have been seriously gardening vegetables for the last 8 years, and these are 5 universal truths that I've learned that make people master gardeners. The sun has gone away behind the clouds. I can take my funny hat off. So I'm gardening in Zone 5A, Oshkosh, Wisconsin, United States. Not the longest growing season, but this hobby has become a passion, and it seems like any book that I read or any YouTuber that I watch share a lot of really good things in common if they're quite successful. So I've essentially narrowed it down to my top 5 picks, because who doesn't like a good top 5? All the footage for this is mostly my preparation for the garden this year from March through now, the middle of May. So, you know, hang on, enjoy the ride, and let's get started with item number 1. To begin, you've got to plan and prepare. Behind me is an example of that preparation, and in fact, they've got an old video from 5 years ago, 4 years ago, when I was planning my garden every single year from 2013 through 2019, so it's antiquated. But through lots of good preparation and hard work, I have, built my fence and other interesting things. I've got fruit trees here. I'm actually standing in the middle of an orchard of 9 different trees this year. Think for the long term, those planning steps really pay off in dividends. Planning, of course, goes a lot deeper than just planting trees. Every year, during the very long, cold winter months that we have, I like to go seed shopping online. I've got several different important places that I tend to go to. Seed Savers Exchange being number 1, based in Decorah, Iowa, United States. It's so interesting starting your own seeds. I think there are multiple hobbies: seed saving, seeds starting, and seed collecting, to be honest. I like all of them for different reasons, but this year I was finally successful starting my seeds en masse, and in fact only my peppers didn't take. I got a little ambitious myself and didn't follow through on my planning steps of when to plant out, and I planted some of my squash when it was above freezing, but still just below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and that spelled death. It was fine for a mature plant, but not for a juvenile plant. Whatever, we learn, we move on. We'll talk about that later. What is it, Sun Tzu said, those who don't plan have already failed, essentially. Now we're not going to war, and I'm paraphrasing, but gardening is kind of like that. You want to be successful. So take the time to plan. It's also fun. It's fun to draw up a map, in my opinion, of where I'm going to plant things. And it's exciting to look at pictures from year to year and see what's grown and know what timing you need and what the weather should be like and what the rain should be like and the soil conditions and everything else. So plan, 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 and prepare. Item number 2 is to work with nature. Sounds pretty obvious, right? But I think a lot of people work against nature. I see a lot of gardeners in my area that are just annual heavy, and they do plants that are not right for your cold hardiness zone. They don't abide by their average last frost dates and first frost dates. They don't think about how cold it's going to be, how many average heat days you have. And of course, you don't have to be an expert on that kind of stuff, but you do have to have some sort of wherewithal for what nature is going to do and tie that into what kind of plants you want to grow, if you're in an area that's got limited or sporadic rain, you got to make sure you have tolerant plants, or you build in processes that can accommodate for that. For example, in 2018, 3 seasons ago now, I switched to primarily raised beds. Our soil here is a dense clay. It's pretty thick, so there was no chance that I could grow root vegetables. I was terrible at carrots and radishes and beets, etc. Doing raised beds has really been beneficial because I can amend the soil and make it a little bit easier for roots to grow and such. But in amending the soil, when I built my beds, I used the soil that was around me, so the soil where I was just digging up from the ground and adding things like peat moss and perlite to it, so you're using what you had as opposed to just buying a whole bunch of expensive soils. And I also have some decomposing logs on the inside there. I know roots will grow to the center with those logs where they're decomposing, and that helps store moisture. What else? I definitely mulch on top of my raised beds with leaves. We got just lots of leaves in our area. If you had hay, if you're on a farm or something, that'd be great too. I've seen people growing wood chips, and that works really well for them. But the whole point of any sort of mulch on top of my beds is that it helps retain moisture. So if we have a decent rain or I give it a good watering, for the next 4 or 5 days, even if it's hot in the 80s or 90s Fahrenheit, it'll still keep the soil moist, which makes the plant not stress out as much. Another thing to keep in mind when we're talking about working with nature is know the cycle of the sun for wherever you're planting. Fortunately for me, right here, this is the south. So my garden is predominantly southern facing, as the sun tracks like this. But I've got some great big maple trees back there and some oak trees in the front, and even my house casts a pretty decent shadow on these trees. And that's okay, because some plants like that, Think of them growing naturally in some sort of permaculture. You've got lots of things growing underneath trees that like the shade. So when you're thinking of shade, plant your lettuce and your spinach and things that tend to migrate towards not full direct sun. Isn't it great when I ramble? I'm pretty much like this all the time. I've got a note card. Item number 3. Let's go with grow up. Okay. Grow up. What do I mean by that? Vertical gardening. This is pretty important, and I have taken this to heart. Everything you grow can grow on the ground. Well, not everything. That's a stupid blanket statement. Most things will grow on the ground, but many of them you can trellis in some way, shape, or form. Start with tomatoes. I love to grow indeterminate tomatoes and single stem them so they grow between 6 and 8 feet tall. They're super awesome to look at. It helps mitigate some sort of plant diseases, it controls the moisture, you get good airflow going through them. Growing up. Think about my squash. You got pumpkins, you got different gourds, cantaloupes, etc. Those will all vine out and crawl along any sort of floor you've got. But with a simple trellis, or in my case, I've got an arched tunnel right through the door. Those just grow up and around. So again, the airflow is great. It's better for pollination, and it keeps it off the floor, and it looks really, really cool. I grow a lot of things vertically. This year I'm growing Jerusalem artichokes, sunchokes they're called. Those are pretty tall. They look like big, beautiful yellow sunflowers. I grow mammoth sunflowers. Those suckers get about 10 or 12 feet tall. And you can grow stuff up them too. Same with my corn. Corn will get about 7, 8 feet tall. Just be smart. With the corn, you plant some beans. They grow up it, or peas. Those also they grow really well. They use the stalk of the growing sunflower, or corn in this case, to their advantage, and as a trellis. You know what I'm trying to get at. Grow up. The fourth thing to master is garden automation. I think Luke, the MI gardener, has a book called The Autopilot Garden. Go ahead and check it out. I'm not getting any sponsorship for a plug there, but it's worth your time, and all those principles make so much sense. When I think of automation, I think of perennials. That kind of ties back to my first comment, where too many people in my area go annual crazy and don't remember perennials. Perennials are going to be your biggest bang for your buck. I've got a whole hedge of raspberries here that I started 7 years ago from one plant, and from that $20 investment I get hundreds of dollars worth of food. In fact, last year I weighed everything that I grew and I calculated it, and I came out to well over $1,000, which is just great, and that number goes up every single year. But those perennials, like the raspberries, they're on autopilot. All I did was plant it once, and then every year until I got the hedge that I wanted, I just moved some of the roots and put them in their spot, and they grew, and that's it. Now all I have to do is pull them out when they're growing in areas that I don't want. Trees are another great way to be on autopilot. Like I said, once you get them in the ground and they grow and they're well established, they just produce year after year after year. You do some real basic things, insect care and whatnot, but it's an autopilot kind of thing. Same with some of my onions, they come up year after year. Asparagus, strawberries, gooseberries, currants, it's all perennial. Let's say work smarter, not harder. Like my potato planting method. I call it a no-dig method, but really I just dig a little trench, throw my seed potatoes in, cover it up, and then I'll mulch it with more leaves and some compost, and then I leave it for 90 days, depending on the variety, until I pick it. It doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to break your back digging holes. Just work smarter, not harder. And then it'll automate itself. Tying into this, using mulch, using my leaves and what's available in nature, like I said in item 1 or 2 a few minutes ago. I finally got it down to where I really don't have to worry about any kind of weeds in my garden except thistles, but those suckers just have wicked taproot, so they're impossible to get rid of for me. But I don't have any sort of surface-dwelling weeds to worry about, dandelions or any kind of clover, because the mulch that I grow in just prevents them from growing. I got my nice transplants or direct sown seeds right in between the leaves, and they just grow up, and then the leaves cover the soil, so that keeps it nice and moist, does the weeding for me. You know, you guys are lucky that I edit this because I ramble so much. My final thing, and this is kind of a catch-all, isn't it? Fail, learn, and try again. Man, oh man, have I failed on so many things. And in my opinion, failure is what makes you an expert, because failure is the first step in becoming an expert. Let's call it that way. I personally learn best My street's kind of like a drag strip sometimes in the summertime with motorcycles. Sorry about that. I personally learn best when I make a mistake, because then I realize what I did and what I shouldn't do moving forward. And odds are, when I screw up on one thing, it can be applied to 2 or 3 others. So a mistake with one plant benefits more things in the garden. Oh man, mistakes I have made. Let's talk about a few of them. Some of my fruit trees. I had them guarded, with plastic ribbed girders on the bottom for years, and one year I had some girdling. Rodents got in there and ate around the tree, and I lost the tree, and that drove me nuts, because you take care of these things like children, and then it happens. Never again. Now all of my trees are wrapped with a different kind of polymer, up 2 or 3 feet depending on the branch, and I mulch them differently too, so hopefully nothing is going to be getting in there and chewing them apart, and they will grow better, and I learned from my mistake. Corn. I've made so many mistakes with corn. That's one that I just have problems with. This is my 3rd year trying to grow it seriously, and this year I'm growing it in raised beds, and I'm going to be using netting, talking about things that I've learned. Other years I planted it too close to a fence. Squirrels would get at it when it grew, and it would just be like a disaster, like some sort of crime scene when I come out in the morning, and corn stalks and like corn hair would be everywhere. So not happening this year. They're going to be in raised beds with netting around them, and hopefully they should grow nice and tall and be successful. But try and try again. And to an end, if you keep trying and things just don't work for you, be smart and learn from that and just stop. So if the corn doesn't work for me this year, I'm done. I'll put something else in the beds. I know, guys. Learning is constantly ongoing. It's adult learning, years out of high school, college, grad school, even for a couple years now. Adult learning is trying things, being very tactile, with our brains. I watch a lot of YouTube, I read a lot of books, and then I experiment in the own garden. I think that's the best way to learn. Just go out there and try. I think it's important every year to do at least 1 or 2 things that you've never done in your garden before, because you'll learn something about that item, and like I said, it'll probably tie into a couple other things in your garden. So, and it keeps things new for you. It's beneficial. You learn, you grow. And on the topic of learning, include your kids, because my little daughter, she loves getting her hands dirty. She helped me plant my beans this year. Well, it would have taken me 20 minutes, took me about 2 hours, because I had to pour the seeds out into my hand and pick them out one by one. She did, and point in the trench, and she put it in there and pat it down, but boy, does she have a fun time, and she's learning a lot. I think I'm about done rambling. If you stuck through it this whole time, be sure to check out the cards that I've got linked up top. I know I'm at least going to put up there my 6-year garden revolution, which is the whole story of my gardens from inception until a couple years ago. It's really eye-opening. If you're just starting gardening, it shows how in my opinion, beautiful, lush oasis became what it was from literally a pile of trash that we inherited when we bought the house. So anything is possible. And I'm gonna definitely link my garden planning video from a couple years ago too, so you can see planning in action and what came to fruition. So lots of things to inspire you. Google will, of course, recommend a video for you if you stuck on this long, and I hope you subscribe if you're new. I do ramble a lot like this, but it's decent content. You guys take care. I've got gardening to do.